The winter in Silver Peak, Idaho, doesn't arrive, it invades. It comes down from the Sawtooth Mountains like an occupying army, stripping the heat from the valley floor and turning the asphalt of Highway 93 into a black mirror of ice and death. On the night of December 14th, the thermometer at the solitary way station outside of town read 16 degrees below zero. It was the kind of cold that doesn't just freeze water, it freezes hope. It makes the world quiet, sealing it under a dome of silence where the only things that move are the wind and the desperate. Jackson Holloway, known to the state of Idaho as a mechanic and to the Iron Reapers Motorcycle Club as Grizz, wasn't supposed to be on Highway 93. He was supposed to be 40 miles south, sitting in front of a wood stove with a glass of whiskey, waiting out the storm. But life, or perhaps something higher, often intervenes in the form of mechanical failure. A frantic call from a stranded prospect with a blown transmission had pulled Grizz out of his warm house and into the teeth of the blizzard. Now, at 2 a.m., with the prospect's bike loaded onto a trailer and the job done, Grizz was riding his own machine, a 1998 Harley Road King, back through the desolation. His bike was loud, a thundering beast of American steel that usually roared its defiance against the elements. But tonight, even the 1,450 cubic centimeters engine seemed muffled by the oppressive weight of the snow. Grizz felt the cold seeping through his heated gloves, gnawing at his knuckles. He was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite, 6'4", beard graying at the chin, eyes that had seen too much of the ugly side of the world. He didn't scare easily, but out here, in the white void, he felt a primal urge to get to shelter. The urge was interrupted by a sound that didn't belong. He had pulled off at the abandoned rail yard near the old lumber mill to check a loose saddlebag strap. The engine was cut. The silence rushed in, heavy and ringing. Grizz secured the strap, his breath pluming in the air like dragon smoke. He was swinging his leg back over the saddle when he heard it. Thump, thump. It wasn't the wind. The wind hissed and screamed. It didn't thump. This was rhythmic, dull. It sounded like meat hitting metal. Grizz paused, his hand hovering over the ignition. Most people would have started the bike. Most people would have told themselves it was a loose shutter, a raccoon, or just the house-settling groans of the old mill. Most people train themselves to ignore the noises that might demand something from them. But Grizz hadn't survived 30 years in the club by ignoring his gut. His gut told him something was wrong. He pulled a heavy Maglite flashlight from his belt, the beam cutting a sharp cone through the swirling snow. "Hello," he called out. His voice was deep, a baritone roughened by years of road dust and tobacco. "Anyone out there?" The wind held back. Grizz walked toward the sound. It was coming from the far side of the loading dock, where a row of rusted green dumpsters sat like metal coffins under the overhang. The snow here was undisturbed, a pristine white sheet, except for a single, faint trail. It wasn't footprints. It was a drag mark, like something small had pulled itself through the powder. Grizz followed the trail. It led behind the third dumpster, a massive unit overflowing with frozen construction debris. The thumping sound came again, weaker this time. Thump, scrape. Grizz rounded the corner, swinging the light down. The beam hit a pile of wet cardboard. Then, the cardboard moved. Wedged between the freezing steel of the dumpster and a concrete retaining wall was a boy. He was curled into a fetal ball so tight, he looked less like a human and more like a discarded bundle of rags. He was wearing an oversized hoodie that was soaked through and frozen stiff, stiff enough that it crackled when he shivered. He had no gloves. On his feet were canvas sneakers, the left one missing its laces, the rubber sole split open to reveal a sock that was caked in ice. Grizz didn't gasp. He didn't recoil. He went into a mode that bypassed emotion and went straight to action. He dropped to his knees in the slush, the freezing water soaking instantly into his jeans, and reached out. "Hey," Grizz said, keeping his voice low and steady. "Hey, little man, I need you to look at me." The boy didn't move. The shivering was violent, a full-body convulsion that shook the cardboard he was lying on. This was the danger zone. When the shivering stops, the dying begins. The boy was still fighting. Grizz pulled the wet cardboard away. The boy's face was turned toward the metal wall, hiding. Grizz gently touched the boy's shoulder. It felt like touching a bag of frozen gravel, hard, cold, and frighteningly thin. "Don't," the boy whispered. The voice was so quiet, Grizz almost missed it. It was a dry, cracking sound. "Don't tell him," the boy said again, his voice breaking on a sob that had no air behind it. "I'm still in the timeout. I didn't move. I promise." Grizz felt a spike of rage, so hot it almost warmed the air around him. "Timeout. You don't put a child in a timeout behind a dumpster in sub-zero weather. You put garbage there. You're not in a timeout anymore," Grizz said firmly. He began to strip off his heavy leather coat, then his thermal riding jacket. He was left in just a flannel shirt, the wind biting into his skin instantly, but he didn't care. He wrapped the heavy, warm leather around the boy. "My name is Grizz. I'm getting you out of here." The boy tried to pull away, his eyes wide and unfocused. They were blue, striking against the deathly pallor of his skin, but the whites were red with burst blood vessels. "No," he stammered, his teeth clattering together like dice. "The timer." He set the timer. "I have to wait for the alarm." "The timer is broken," Grizz lied, scooping the boy up. He weighed nothing. That was the first terrifying fact that hit Grizz's brain. A boy this size, maybe 8 or 9 years old, should have weight. He should have substance. This boy felt like a hollow bird. Grizz could feel every rib through the wet hoodie. He could feel the sharp point of a shoulder blade that felt fragile enough to snap. "What's your name, son?" Grizz asked, rushing back toward the bike. He knew he couldn't put the kid on the back. The wind chill would kill him in 3 miles. He needed to get him indoors, immediately. "Noah," the boy whispered, his head lolling against Grizz's chest. "I'm Noah." "Okay, Noah. You stay awake. You hear me? You keep your eyes on my beard. You count the gray hairs if you have to." Grizz kicked open the door to the Mills foreman's office. It was a derelict shack, smelling of rat droppings and old grease, but it was out of the wind. He laid Noah on a dusty workbench and immediately began rubbing his arms and legs, generating friction. "Stay with me," Grizz commanded. He pulled out his phone. 1 bar of service. It was enough. He didn't call 911. In Silver Peak, the response time for an ambulance to an abandoned mill in a blizzard was 45 minutes, if they came at all. And Grizz knew something else. If he called the cops, the system would start its slow, grinding gears. Papers would be filed. Guardians would be called. And Noah was terrified of a him. Grizz wasn't handing this boy back to a him until he knew who him was. He dialed a number that belonged to a man named Document Doc. Wasn't just a road name. He was a former combat medic and the vice president of the Iron Reapers. "Yeah," Doc answered, his voice groggy. "I have a code blue at the old Blackwood mill," Grizz said, his voice clipping the words. "Child. Male. Approximate 9 years old. Severe hypothermia. Malnutrition. Signs of trauma. I need the van, and I need you. 5 minutes." "I'm rolling," Doc said. The line went dead. No questions. No hesitation. That is the difference between a club and a friendship. A friend asks why. A brother asks where. While he waited, Grizz kept Noah talking. It was a battle. Noah's eyes kept rolling back, the lure of the warm, dark sleep pulling at him. Sleep is the final stage of freezing. It feels peaceful. It is fatal. "What's your favorite food, Noah?" Grizz asked, rubbing the boy's hands between his own massive, calloused palms. "Bread," Noah whispered. Grizz paused. Kids usually say pizza. "Ice cream. Candy. Bread. With butter," Noah said, a faint smile ghosting his lips. "Sometimes, if I'm good, I get the butter." Grizz swallowed a lump in his throat that tasted like acid. "When we get out of here, Noah, I'm going to buy you a whole bakery. I'm going to get you so much butter you can swim in it." Noah's hand, small and blue, reached out and touched the patch on Grizz's vest, which was wrapped around him. His finger traced the skull and sighed. Are you a monster? Some people think so, Grizz said softly. Good, Noah whispered, his eyes closing. Monsters can fight the bad man. The van arrived in 8 minutes. Doc was behind the wheel of the club's transport vehicle, a black Ford Transit usually used for hauling gear. He slammed the brakes, sliding on the ice, and was out the door with a trauma bag before the wheels stopped rolling. Doc took one look at Noah, and his face, usually jovial, hardened into stone. He shone a penlight into Noah's eyes. Pupils are sluggish, Doc said, his movements precise and fast. Core temp is dropping. We need to move. St. Joseph's is 20 minutes out. Can he make it? Grizz asked, climbing into the back with them. He decides that, Doc said, wrapping Noah in a thermal foil blanket. But he's got fight in him. Look at his hands. Grizz looked. Noah's fists were clenched tight. Even unconscious, he was bracing for a hit. The drive to St. Joseph's Medical Center was a blur of black ice and red lights. Grizz sat in the back, holding Noah's hand. He felt the small bones, the rough skin. He noticed a watch on Noah's wrist. It was a cheap, plastic digital watch. The screen was cracked, but it wasn't set to the time. It was set to a countdown timer. Midnight. The timer, Grizz murmured, remembering Noah's words. He was waiting for an alarm. What kind of man makes a kid sit in the snow with a timer? Doc asked from the front, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The kind of man, Grizz said, staring out at the passing darkness, who is going to wish he froze to death instead of me finding him. They hit the emergency room bay at 2:48 a.m. The automatic doors hissed open, and Grizz carried Noah in, bypassing the front desk. Pediatric trauma, he roared. The sleepy waiting room woke up instantly. A security guard started to step forward, saw the patches on Grizz's vest, saw the limp boy in his arms, and stepped back. Dr. Sarah Evans was the night attending. She was small, sharp, and had no patience for nonsense. She took one look at Noah and pointed to Trauma Bay 2. Get him on the bed. Cut the clothes. I need warm saline stat. Grizz stood in the corner of the room, out of the way but refusing to leave. He watched as the nurses cut away the frozen hoodie. He watched as they stripped off the wet undershirt. And then, the room went silent. It wasn't just the ribs. Noah's back was a canvas of cruelty. There were old scars, silver lines that crisscrossed his skin like a road map of pain. There were fresh bruises, dark purple and yellow, shaped like fingers. And there, right in the center of his chest, was a burn. It was shaped like a signet ring. A brand. Dr. Evans stopped moving for a split second. She looked up, her eyes meeting Grizz's. There was no judgment in her eyes about the biker anymore. There was only a shared, horrified understanding. This isn't just exposure, she said, her voice tight. This is systematic. This is torture. She turned to the nurse. Call the sheriff. And call CPS. Now. No. The scream came from the bed. Noah had woken up as the warm fluids hit his veins. He was thrashing, his eyes wild with terror. Don't call. He hears the calls. He has the scanner. He'll know I left. Grizz stepped forward, ignoring the nurse's protest. He put a large, heavy hand on Noah's shoulder. Not to hold him down, but to ground him. Noah, Grizz said. Look at me. Noah froze, his chest heaving. The scanner doesn't matter, Grizz said. The timer doesn't matter. You are behind the wall now. He breaks walls, Noah sobbed. He's the councilman. He says he is the law. Grizz and Doc exchanged a look. Councilman. Suddenly, the pieces clicked. The isolation. The fear of the police. The him, who could do anything. Noah wasn't running from a drunk stepdad in a trailer park. He was running from Councilman Richard Vance. A man who owned half the real estate in Silver Peak. A man who sat on the board of the hospital they were standing in. A man who had run on a platform of family values. Grizz pulled out his phone. He opened the group chat for the Iron Reapers. He typed a single message, St. Joseph's Hospital. The kid was found frozen. The abuser is Councilman Vance. Need the family here. Code Phoenix. Then he put the phone away and looked at Dr. Evans. You do your job, document. We'll handle security. Security is in the lobby, the nurse said nervously. No, Grizz said, walking to the door. Real security is on the way. Within 20 minutes, the rumble began. It started as a low vibration in the distance, shaking the snow off the hospital awnings. Then, the headlights appeared. Rows of them. The Iron Reapers rolled into the hospital parking lot in formation, the V-twin engines thumping in unison, a mechanical heartbeat that was louder than the storm. They came from 3 counties, members from the Silver Peak Charter and allied chapters from Boise and Twin Falls. 67 men. They parked their bikes in lines, kickstands down, engines cut. Silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a predator waiting. Among them was Bishop Cole, the club's president, a man with silver hair and a scar across his jaw that he'd earned in Desert Storm. He walked through the hospital doors flanked by 2 enforcers, made eye contact with Grizz through the trauma bay window, and nodded once. The message was clear: we hold the line. They didn't storm the doors. They didn't yell. They simply lined up along the glass wall of the ER entrance. Arms crossed, leather cuts glistening with melted snow. They were a wall of black denim and leather, standing between the hospital and the world. Inside, the night shift manager was panicking. He called the police. There's a gang outside, he stammered to the dispatcher. Dozens of them. They're just standing there. Are they blocking the ambulances? The dispatcher asked. No. Are they threatening anyone? No. They're just watching. Shortly after dawn, the automatic doors slid open. But it wasn't the police. It was a man in a camel hair coat, expensive leather gloves, and a face that was plastered on billboards all over town. Councilman Richard Vance walked in. He looked like the picture of a worried father. His hair was disheveled just enough to look frantic, but not messy. He was holding a phone. He walked straight to the reception desk. My son, he said, his voice booming with authority. Noah Vance. I received a call that he was brought here. Where is he? The receptionist, a young girl named Kaylee, stammered. Sir, I can't. He's in trauma. I am his legal guardian, Vance snapped, the nice guy mask slipping for a fraction of a second. And I am a member of this hospital's board. Take me to him. Now. He pushed past the desk. He marched toward the double doors of the trauma wing. He reached for the handle. A hand, the size of a shovel, clamped onto his shoulder. Vance spun around. He found himself looking up and up into the face of Grizz. Get your hands off me, Vance hissed. Do you know who I am? I know what you are, Grizz rumbled. And you aren't going in that room. Vance laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. You think you can stop me? I'll have the sheriff here in 2 minutes. I'll have you arrested for assault. I'll have your bike impounded and crushed. Sheriff's on his way, Grizz said calmly. But until he gets here, you deal with me. I have rights, Vance shouted, playing to the room now, trying to look like the victim. This thug is keeping a father from his injured son. My boy has mental issues. He runs away. He hurts himself. I've been out all night looking for him. It was a good performance. Almost perfect. Except for one thing. From down the hallway, a small voice drifted out. The trauma room door was cracked open. He's lying. The room went quiet. Dr. Evans pushed Noah's bed into the doorway. Noah was sitting up, wrapped in warm blankets, clutching a stuffed bear that Doc had pulled from his saddlebag. Noah pointed a shaking finger at Vance. He wasn't looking for me, Noah whispered. He was watching the game. I heard him cheering when I was in the box. Vance's face turned a color that wasn't quite human. It was the color of a predator whose trap has snapped on its own leg. Noah, Vance said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, silky tone. Stop making up stories. You're confused. The hypothermia is making you hallucinate. Come here to Daddy. He took a step forward. Bishop Cole materialized beside Grizz, blocking the path. 2 mountains where there had been one. He said he was in the box, Grizz said. What box, Vance? It's a metaphor, Vance shouted, sweat starting to bead on his forehead despite the cold. He means his room. He calls it a box because he feels confined. He's claustrophobic. No, another voice cut in. Walking through the main doors was a woman. She looked tired. She was holding a briefcase. This was Sarah Jenkins, a social worker who had been fired 6 months ago from the county CPS office. The town thought she was incompetent. The truth was, she had asked too many questions about Councilman Vance. It's not a metaphor, Sarah said, her voice shaking but loud. I saw the blueprints. Vance froze. You, he sneered. You were fired for harassment. I was fired because I found the permit request for a soundproof storage unit in your basement, Sarah said, walking until she stood next to Grizz. I tried to inspect it. You called my supervisor. You said it was for wine storage. But wine doesn't need a lock on the inside, Richard. She turned to Grizz. He kept him in the dark, sometimes for days. Sensory deprivation. He called it resetting the behavior. The air in the lobby changed. The nurses, the security guard, the other patients, they all looked at Vance. The worried father act evaporated. In its place stood a man who realized his power was bleeding out on the linoleum floor. This is ridiculous, Vance scoffed, checking his watch. I'm leaving. I'm going to call my lawyer, and then I'm going to sue this hospital for every dime it has. He turned to leave, but the exit was blocked. Standing in the sliding doors was Sheriff Miller, and behind him, in the cold morning light, the Iron Reapers stood like sentinels. You're not going anywhere, Richard, the sheriff said. He looked tired. He held a piece of paper in his hand. We just executed a warrant on your property, based on the probable cause of the boy found half dead and Ms. Jenkins' statement about the unauthorized basement construction. You can't go in my house. Vance screamed. We already did, the sheriff said. We found the box, Richard. And we found the camera. You recorded it? You sick son of a bitch. You recorded him begging for water. Vance's knees buckled. He looked for an ally. He looked at the receptionist. He looked at the doctor. He saw only disgust. Then he looked at Noah. Noah, Vance pleaded, desperate now. Tell them I love you. Tell them I bought you toys. Remember the bike? I bought you a bike. Noah looked at the man who had been his world, his jailer, and his god for 3 years. He gripped the stuffed bear tight. He looked at Grizz, the giant in the leather vest who stood like a mountain. You bought me a bike, Noah said softly. But you never let me ride it. You said I had to earn the wheels. Noah looked at Grizz. Can I have wheels now? Grizz smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful smile. Kid, he said, you got 100 wheels waiting for you outside. The steel doors of the county lockup slammed shut with a finality that usually breaks men, but Richard Vance didn't break. He stood in the holding cell, his cashmere coat folded neatly on the bench to avoid the grime, looking at Sheriff Miller through the bars with an expression of mild annoyance, like a man whose dinner reservation had been slightly delayed. He checked his watch, a Rolex Submariner that cost more than the sheriff's annual salary, and shook his head. You've made a mistake, Jim, Vance said, his voice calm, practiced, the voice that had won him 3 elections. A very expensive, career-ending mistake. You let a gang of criminals intimidate you into arresting a pillar of this community based on the hallucinations of a sick child. Sheriff Miller didn't answer. He just looked at Vance, really looked at him, for the first time in 10 years. He saw the charm that masked the rot. He turned and walked away, the sound of his boots echoing on the concrete, leaving Vance alone with the silence. But Vance wasn't afraid of silence. He had weaponized silence for years. He believed, truly believed, that by morning his lawyer would have the paperwork filed, the judge would offer an apology, and the narrative would be spun back to the troubled, runaway boy and the heroic father. He was wrong. Over the next 48 hours, the investigation unfolded like a nightmare coming into focus. At 6 a.m. that first morning, the forensic team, led by Deputy Elena Rodriguez, entered the Vance residence. It was a sprawling Victorian estate on the hill, the kind of house that gets featured on holiday postcards. It smelled of pine needles and expensive furniture polish. In the living room, a 12-foot Christmas tree sparkled with crystal ornaments. But Rodriguez walked past the beauty. She walked past the gourmet kitchen with the granite countertops and the untouched fruit bowl. She headed straight for the basement door, the one Sarah Jenkins had identified. The door was heavy, solid oak, reinforced with a steel core. It had a keypad lock on the outside. There was no handle on the inside. When they cracked it open, the air that rushed out was stale, recycled, and dead. It didn't smell like a home. It smelled like a cage. The box, as Noah had called it, was a 6x6 room constructed of soundproofing foam painted black. There was no window. There was no furniture, save for a bucket and a thin yoga mat. In the center of the ceiling was a single, high-wattage bulb protected by a wire cage. And in the corner, mounted high, was a camera lens. The hard drive was still recording, still capturing footage of an empty room that had held so much suffering. Deputy Rodriguez, a veteran of 20 years who had seen car wrecks and bar fights, had to step out of the room to vomit. It wasn't gore that sickened her, it was the calculation. On the wall, taped up with blue painter's tape, was a laminated sheet of paper. It was titled Behavior Modification Log. It wasn't a child's chore chart. It was a prison ledger. November 12th, spilled water. Consequence, 4 hours of darkness. November 14th, failed to smile at dinner guests. Consequence, 12 hours of isolation. Reduced rations. December 10th, asked about mother. Consequence, the cold protocol. The cold protocol. Rodriguez stared at the entry. She realized with a jolt of horror that the cold protocol wasn't just a phrase. It was the mill. It was the dumpster. It was a premeditated exposure designed to bring a child to the brink of death to teach him gratitude for the warmth he was denied. While the police dismantled the House of Horrors, the hospital had become a fortress. The Iron Reapers hadn't left. They had set up a perimeter that was as organized as it was intimidating. They rotated shifts. There were always 4 bikes at the main entrance, 2 at the emergency bay, and 1 man sitting in a folding chair right outside the door of room 304. Inside room 304, Noah was sleeping. It was a fitful, twitching sleep. Every time the HVAC system kicked on with a hum, he flinched, his hands flying up to protect his face. Grizz sat in the armchair by the window. He hadn't showered. He hadn't changed his clothes. He smelled of sweat, leather, and stale coffee, but to Noah, when he woke up, that smell was the only thing that made sense. Noah's eyes cracked open. He saw the ceiling tiles. He panicked, his breath hitching in a sob. Then he saw the beard. "I'm here," Grizz rumbled, not moving from the chair. "The door is locked. The window is guarded. You are safe." "Did he call?" Noah whispered. "He always calls. He says if I don't answer, the timer adds an hour." "He can't call," Grizz said. "He doesn't have a phone anymore. He traded it for a pair of handcuffs." Noah blinked, processing this. Handcuffs. Like on TV. Just like on TV. But tighter. Noah lay back, clutching the stuffed bear. "He has friends," Noah said softly. "Important friends. They come to the house. They drink the wine. They see me standing in the corner. They never look at my face. They just look at their glasses." That sentence, "they never look at my face," was the key that unlocked the second phase of the war. It wasn't just Vance. It was the enablers. The people who saw the shadow and decided it was just a trick of the light. By noon, Sheriff Miller had the behavior log and evidence, but he knew that in a town like Silver Peak, Vance's defense team would spin it. They would call it strict discipline. They would call it religious upbringing. They needed more. They needed to break the code of silence that Vance had built around his life. They started with the neighbors. Mrs. Evelyn Gabler lived directly next door to the Vance estate. She was 62, the president of the Homeowners Association, a woman who measured the length of people's grass with a ruler. When Deputy Rodriguez knocked on her door, Mrs. Gabler opened it just a crack, the chain still on. I don't want any trouble, she said, her voice tight. Richard is a very powerful man. He's on the zoning board. Richard is in a cell, Mrs. Gabler, Rodriguez said sharply. And we found a boy frozen half to death because nobody wanted trouble. Now, you can talk to me here, or I can subpoena you and you can talk to me in front of a grand jury. Your choice. Mrs. Gabler undid the chain. She sat on her floral sofa, twisting a handkerchief. I heard him, she confessed, the words spilling out like poison she had been holding in her mouth. In the summers, the windows would be open. I heard Richard yelling, not like a parent yells, like a drill sergeant. And I heard the boy crying, but it wasn't loud crying. It was muffled, like he was trying to scream with his hand over his mouth. Did you ever see him? Rodriguez asked. Once, Mrs. Gabler whispered. Last July. I was gardening. I looked over the fence. The boy was in the backyard. It was 90 degrees out. He was wearing a heavy winter coat. He was walking in circles, just marching, round and round. Richard was sitting on the patio, drinking iced tea, holding a stopwatch. And you didn't call 911? Mrs. Gabler looked down. I called Richard, she admitted. I asked if everything was all right. He told me Noah had sensory processing issues and needed the weight of the coat to feel grounded. He thanked me for my concern. He sent me a fruit basket the next day. It was a very nice basket. A fruit basket. That was the price of a child's torture. A basket of pears and apples bought the silence of a neighbor while a boy marched in a winter coat in the heat of July. The dominoes began to fall. Once the sheriff had Mrs. Gabler's statement, he went to the school. He walked into the office of Principal Henderson, a man who had a framed photo of himself shaking hands with Councilman Vance on his desk. I am shocked, Henderson claimed, sweating through his shirt. Noah was homeschooled. We had no jurisdiction. He was pulled out of school 2 years ago, Sheriff Miller said, slamming a file onto the desk. Before that, he was a student here. And in this file, I see 3 reports from his second-grade teacher, Mrs. Albright. She reported bruising. She reported he was stealing food from the cafeteria trash cans. She flagged him for a CPS review. Mrs. Albright was overzealous, Henderson stammered. Mr. Vance explained that the bruising was from martial arts classes. And the food. He said the boy had a disorder where he couldn't stop eating. Prader-Willi syndrome, I think he called it. Did you get a medical note for that diagnosis? Miller asked. Mr. Vance is a donor, Henderson said, his defense crumbling into the ugly truth. He paid for the new scoreboard in the gym. He said if we pursued a baseless investigation, he would pull the funding and sue the district for defamation. We couldn't afford the lawsuit, Sheriff. We have a budget deficit. The scoreboard, the fruit basket, the piece, everything had been purchased. Noah's suffering was the currency used to pay for the town's comfort. But while the guilty witnesses were sweating in interrogation rooms, Vance's lawyer, a shark named Sterling who wore 3-piece suits and had a smile like a razor blade, was making his move. The morning after the arrest, an emergency bail hearing was held. Sterling stood before Judge Davidson, a man Vance had helped get elected, and painted a picture of a misunderstood philanthropist. Your Honor, Sterling said, his voice smooth. The state has circumstantial evidence at best. The box is a sensory deprivation therapy room recommended by specialists for children with severe behavioral disorders, fully legal. The log is a private parenting diary documenting his attempts to help a troubled child. To keep a man of Mr. Vance's stature in a cage based on allegations is a travesty of justice. The courtroom was packed, not with Vance's friends. They were hiding now, but with the Brotherhood. 50 of them stood in the back, silent, watching. Judge Davidson looked at the sheriff. He looked at the bikers. And then he looked at the law. Bail is set at $500,000, the judge ruled. Cash. It was a staggering amount. It was meant to be impossible. But the judge had underestimated the depth of Vance's resources. Vance didn't blink. He made a phone call. Within 2 hours, a wire transfer cleared. At 4:30 p.m., Richard Vance walked out of the county jail. He was free. The news hit the hospital like a physical blow. Grizz was in the hallway when his phone buzzed. He read the text from Bishop. He made bail. He's out. Grizz put the phone away. He walked back into the room. Noah was awake, building a tower out of plastic cups the nurse had given him. Is he coming? Noah asked. He sensed the shift in the air. Kids who survive trauma are barometers for danger. They feel the pressure drop before the storm hits. He's out of the building, Grizz said honestly. He never lied to the boy. But he isn't coming here. He'll come, Noah said, knocking the tower down. He has the key to the house. He has the key to everything. He doesn't have the key to us, Grizz said. Grizz walked to the window. Down below, in the parking lot, the formation of bikes shifted. They didn't leave. They tightened. Engines fired up, not to leave, but to warm up. To be ready. Doc, Grizz said into his radio. He's mobile. Initiate the shadow protocol. Copy. Doc's voice came back. We are the shadow. Vance thought he was returning to his life. He called an Uber, a black SUV, to take him home. He sat in the back seat, adjusting his coat, planning his press conference. He would cry. He would talk about the stress of raising a special needs child. He would destroy the sheriff's career. But when the SUV turned onto the main road, Vance noticed something. Behind him, 2 motorcycles pulled out from a side street. They didn't get close. They stayed 50 yards back. Their headlights were on, piercing the twilight. Vance told the driver to turn left. The bikes turned left. He told the driver to speed up. The bikes sped up, effortlessly, sticking to the bumper like iron filings to a magnet. When the SUV reached the Vance estate, the driveway was blocked, not by a barricade, but by a presence. Parked across the street, lining the entire block, were neighbors. But not the neighbors who had looked away. These were new people. People who had seen the news. People who had read the reports. They stood there holding candles. They stood there holding signs that said, "We see you." Vance's driver stopped. "I can't get in, sir. There are people everywhere." "Drive through them," Vance screamed, his composure finally cracking. "I'm not running over a vigil, sir," the driver said, unlocking the doors. "This is where I leave you." Vance stepped out onto the curb. The silence of the crowd was deafening. He walked toward his front gate, head high, trying to look defiant. And then he heard the rumble. From the shadows of the street, the Iron Reapers emerged. They didn't block his path to the house. They lined it. They formed a gauntlet. 20 men on each side of the walkway. They didn't touch him. They didn't speak. They just watched. As Vance walked that path, he felt the weight of 40 eyes on him. It was a different kind of judgment than a court. It was primal. It was the herd identifying the predator and stripping him of his camouflage. He fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them in the snow. He had to kneel to pick them up, kneeling at the feet of a biker named Tiny, who just looked down at him with arms crossed. Vance got inside his house and locked the door. He bolted it. He turned on the alarm. But for the first time in his life, the locks were on the wrong side. He wasn't locking the world out. He was locking himself in with his ghosts. Back at the hospital, the healing was beginning, but it was slow. Noah refused to take off the leather vest Grizz had given him. It was 10 sizes too big, swallowing him whole, but he slept in it. "Why do you wear the cut, little man?" Doc asked him gently while changing the dressing on his burns. "Because it's thick," Noah said. "The bad things can't bite through it." "You need a road name," Grizz said from the corner. "If you wear the cut, you need the name." Noah thought about it. He looked at the compass Grizz had shown him earlier, the one that always pointed north. "Soldier?" Noah asked. Grizz shook his head. "Soldier implies you take orders. You survived on your own. You didn't just follow orders. You endured." Grizz looked at the chart on the wall, the chart that showed Noah's temperature rising, his weight climbing, his spirit returning from the frozen brink. "Phoenix," Grizz said, "because you rose from the ice. You burned, but you didn't turn to ash. You came back." Noah smiled. It was the first real smile, one that reached his eyes. "Phoenix," he whispered. "I like that. But while Phoenix was rising, the dragon was cornered. Inside his empty house, stripped of his log and his box, Vance was drinking scotch and making calls. But nobody was answering. The council members weren't picking up. The mayor's line went to voicemail. Even his lawyer, Sterling, sent a text. "The optics are bad. Richard, stay inside. I'm working on a plea." A plea. Vance threw the glass against the wall. He didn't plead. He commanded. He went to his safe in the study. He spun the dial. He needed cash. He needed to leave. If the town wouldn't obey him, he would vanish. He opened the heavy steel door, and his heart stopped. The safe was empty. No, not empty. There was a single piece of paper sitting on the metal shelf where stacks of cash and passports used to be. Vance picked it up. It was a printout of a bank transfer. A transfer that had moved every cent of his liquid assets. The money he had stolen from Noah's trust fund. The money he had hidden from the IRS. Into a secure escrow account controlled by the court. It wasn't magic. It was legal maneuvering. While Vance was making bail, Sheriff Miller had discovered that the bail money itself had come from an account that contained Noah's inheritance from his deceased father. The court had immediately frozen all of Vance's assets under suspicion of misappropriation of funds. Vance was free, but he was destitute. And that's when the phone rang. It wasn't his lawyer. It wasn't the sheriff. Vance picked it up. "Who is this?" "This is the alarm," a deep, distorted voice said. "You set the timer, Richard. And now it's ringing." The line went dead. Vance ran to the window. Outside, the candles were still burning. The bikers were still watching. The snow was beginning to fall again, covering the world in white. He realized then that the walls of his mansion were just another version of the dumpster. He was cold. He was alone. And the monsters he thought he could control were waiting for him to step outside. The silence in Richard Vance's mansion was broken not by a scream, but by a ringtone. It was a burner phone, one he had hidden in the bottom of a humidor, the only line of communication the court hadn't severed. Vance sat in the dark, the expensive scotch turning warm in his glass, and answered. He didn't speak. He just listened. On the other end was a voice from a past he had paid a lot of money to bury. "I saw the news, Richard." The woman's voice cracked, sounding like sandpaper over gravel. "I saw my boy on the news. You told me he was happy. You told me he was in a private school." Vance smiled. It was a tight, desperate smile, the expression of a drowning man who sees a piece of driftwood. "Plans changed, Monica," Vance said smoothly. "But we can fix it. I can get him back. But I need you. I need the biological mother." This was the card Vance had been holding. The joker in the deck. Noah wasn't an orphan in the strict legal sense. His father was dead, yes, killed in a car accident 3 years ago. But his mother, Monica, hadn't died. She had been erased. An addict struggling with her own demons. She had signed over full legal guardianship to Vance 3 years ago in exchange for a rehab stint and a monthly allowance to stay away and never contact Noah. Vance had told the town she was dead. He had told Noah she was dead. But she was alive. She was sober, and legally, she still had biological rights that could complicate the state's case. 2 days later at St. Joseph's Hospital, the air in the corridor grew thick. It wasn't the smell of antiseptic. It was the smell of trouble. The elevator door slid open, and out walked Sterling, Vance's shark of a lawyer. But he wasn't alone. Walking beside him, looking terrified and wearing a coat that looked brand new and slightly too expensive, was a woman with Noah's eyes. Grizz was standing guard at the door to room 304. He saw them coming. He didn't need a dossier to know who she was. He saw the resemblance in the shape of the nose, the curve of the chin. He stepped into the middle of the hallway, his boots planting wide. He was an immovable object. "Step aside, Mr. Halloway," Sterling said, waving a piece of paper. "I have a court order granting immediate visitation to the biological mother, Monica Reed. The state has no grounds to hold the child from his natural parent." Grizz looked at the woman. She wouldn't meet his eyes. She was twisting the strap of her purse, looking at the floor, looking at the ceiling, looking anywhere but at the door where her son lay recovering from torture. "You sold him," Grizz said. His voice was a low rumble, vibrating in the quiet hallway. "You sold him for a check, and now you're back for a refund?" "I didn't know," Monica whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "Richard told me he was safe. I just want to see my son." "He thinks you're dead," Grizz said brutally. "He thinks you died with his dad. You walk in there now, you don't just break his heart. You break his reality." "That is not for you to decide," Sterling snapped. Sheriff Miller appeared from the nurse's station. He looked sick. He looked at the paper Sterling held. He looked at Grizz. "It's a valid order, Grizz," Miller said, his voice heavy with regret. "Parental rights are a strong law. If she wants to see him, we can't stop her. Not without a hearing." Grizz didn't move. The other bikers down the hall shifted, hands coming out of pockets. The tension was a wire pulled to the snapping point. One wrong move, and this became a brawl. And a brawl would get Noah taken away faster than any court order. "5 minutes," Grizz said. "She gets 5 minutes. And I stay in the room." "Unacceptable," Sterling started. "Take the deal," Miller warned the lawyer. "Because the alternative is trying to move a mountain." Monica walked into the room. Noah was sitting up, watching cartoons. He looked healthier, his cheeks filling out, the phoenix vest draped over his shoulders like a cape. When the door opened, he looked up, expecting a nurse or maybe Doc with a new toy. He saw the woman. He froze. The cartoon played on, a cheerful melody in a room that had suddenly gone cold. "Noah," Monica whispered. Noah dropped the remote. He scrambled backward, pressing himself against the headboard, pulling the vest tight around him. "No," he whimpered. "No, you're a ghost. Dad said you're a ghost." "I'm not a ghost, baby," she sobbed, reaching out. "I'm Mommy. I'm here." "You left," Noah screamed. It was a sound that tore through the hospital, a primal shriek of abandonment. "You left me in the box. You never came." Grizz stepped between them instantly. He turned to Monica. "Out," he commanded. "Now." "But he said out." Grizz didn't touch her, but his voice pushed her out of the room as effectively as a shove. He slammed the door and turned to Noah, who was hyperventilating, clawing at his own neck. Grizz gathered the boy in his arms, rocking him, letting the leather vest absorb the tears of a child who had just learned that the only thing worse than a dead parent is a parent who chose not to be there. In the hallway, Sterling was smiling. "Traumatic response," he told the sheriff. "To be expected. We'll file for full custody tomorrow. Mr. Vance has generously offered his estate as a residence for Ms. Reed and the child to facilitate their reunification. He wants to help heal this family." It was a masterstroke of evil. Vance couldn't take Noah back legally. But if the mother took him, and they lived in Vance's house, Noah would be right back in the box. And the witness to Vance's crimes would be silenced under the guise of family reunification. The Brotherhood retreated to the parking lot. They needed a plan. Violence wouldn't work. Kidnapping Noah to save him would just make them criminals and put Noah in foster care in another state. They needed to beat Vance at his own game. They needed information. "Sarge," Grizz said, pacing by his bike. Sarge was the club's sergeant-at-arms and also happened to be a former paralegal who had handled legal battles for the club for years. "I need to know why she's here. I need to know what Vance has on her." "I'm already digging," Sarge said, typing furiously on a laptop balanced on his saddlebags. "She's been clean for 2 years. Living in Nevada. Waitressing. No money. But suddenly, yesterday, a $50,000 retainer was paid to Sterling's firm in her name. And her credit card, which was maxed out, was paid off in full this morning. Vance," Doc spat. "He's buying her." "We need proof," Grizz said. "If we can prove he paid her to come here, it's witness tampering. It's a conspiracy." "The money trail is hidden," Sarge said, frowning. "Offshore accounts. Shell companies. Vance is slippery." Then, a voice spoke up from the edge of the circle. It was Skid, the young prospect who had driven the van that first night. He was holding his phone. "I might know someone," Skid said quietly. My cousin. She works at the casino in Reno where Monica waited tables. She said Monica had a boyfriend. A bad guy. Dealer. Owes a lot of money to the wrong people. Grizz looked at the prospect. Get the cousin on the phone. Now. The next 24 hours were a blur of sleepless energy. While Sterling filed motions and the judge set an emergency custody hearing for the following week, the Iron Reapers turned into an intelligence agency. They didn't use subpoenas, they used leverage. They found the boyfriend in Reno. A biker chapter in Nevada, the Desert Rats, visited him. They didn't hurt him. They just asked him to share his text messages. And there it was. A text thread from 4 days ago. Monica, I can't go back there, Ray. That man is evil. Ray, you go, or we both get buried. He promised to clear the debt. Just get the kid, give him to Vance, and walk away. The Desert Rats sent the screenshots to Sarge. It was the smoking gun. But a screenshot isn't always admissible in court. They needed Monica to admit it. The morning of the custody hearing, 1 week after Noah's rescue, the courthouse was surrounded. The entire town of Silver Peak had shown up. They weren't just onlookers anymore. They were a shield. They held signs. They chanted Noah's name. When Vance's limousine pulled up, he was still playing the role of the benefactor, driving Monica to court. The crowd didn't part. The car had to inch forward. People banged on the windows. Inside the courtroom, the air was stifling. Judge Davidson was presiding again, looking annoyed at the circus his courtroom had become. Ms. Reed, the judge said, looking at Monica, who sat trembling in the witness stand. You are petitioning for immediate custody of your son, Noah. You understand that this would remove him from state protection? Yes, Your Honor, Monica whispered. She looked at Vance, who was sitting in the gallery, smiling his shark smile. He gave her a tiny nod. And you have a stable home environment? Yes. Mr. Vance has offered his guest house. Until I can get on my feet. Objection. Sarge stood up. He was wearing his cut-over a button-down shirt, the only concession he made to the courtroom. The guest house is 50 feet from the torture chamber where her son was held. This isn't a custody arrangement. It's a delivery service. Watch yourself, counsel, the judge warned. Do you have evidence to support this claim? I have a witness, Sarge said. I call Monica Reed to the stand again. But this time, I'd like to remind her that perjury in a case involving child endangerment carries a 20-year sentence. Sarge walked up to the witness box. He didn't yell. He leaned in close. He placed a single piece of paper on the rail. It wasn't the text message. It was a picture. It was a picture of Noah in a hospital bed the day he arrived. The burns. The bruises. The skeleton frame. Look at him, Sarge said softly. Don't look at Vance. Look at your son. Monica looked. Her breath hitched. She started to shake. Vance told you he was happy, Sarge said. He told you he was safe. This is what he did to him, Monica. And if you take him back to that house, this is what he will do again. Only next time, there won't be a dumpster to save him. Next time, it will be a grave. Objection, Sterling screamed, badgering the witness. He promised to pay off Ray, Monica blurted out. The courtroom gasped. Sterling froze. Vance's smile vanished. What did you say? The judge asked, leaning forward. Monica looked up, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. She pointed at Vance. He called me. He said he needed Noah back to stop the investigation. He said if I got custody, I could sign papers saying Noah wouldn't testify. He said he'd pay off Ray's gambling debt and give me $50,000. I didn't know. She sobbed, tapping the photo. I didn't know he hurt him like this. I thought he was just strict. Order. Order in the court. The judge banged his gavel as the room erupted. Vance stood up, his face purple. She's a junkie liar. I never said that. Sit down, Mr. Vance, the judge roared. He turned to the sheriff. Sheriff Miller, take Mr. Vance into custody. Remand him without bail. Witness tampering, conspiracy to commit custodial interference, and obstruction of justice. As the deputies moved in, Vance tried to run. He actually tried to scramble over the barrier. But he didn't get far. He ran straight into Grizz, who was standing by the exit. Grizz didn't hit him. He just stood there. Vance bounced off the biker's chest like a tennis ball hitting a brick wall. He fell to the floor, and the deputies were on him. "It's over, Richard," Grizz said, looking down at the man who was now just a pile of expensive fabric and fear. The timer just hit 0. The aftermath of the trial was swift and brutal for Vance. With Monica's testimony, the financial records, the box, and the parade of witnesses who had looked away, the plea deal was off the table. 6 months later, he was sentenced to 45 years in prison. His assets were seized. The mansion was seized and later demolished, and the lot was turned into a community park named after Noah. But the real ending wasn't in the courtroom. It was on a bright spring morning, 8 weeks after the trial. The snow had finally melted, revealing the brown earth of new beginnings. In the parking lot of St. Joseph's, the Iron Reapers gathered one last time. But they weren't standing guard. They were revving engines. Noah walked out of the hospital doors. He wasn't in a wheelchair. He walked on his own 2 feet, holding the hand of Dr. Sarah Evans, who had been granted emergency foster status with a fast track to adoption. Monica had returned to Nevada, voluntarily terminating her parental rights, realizing that the best way to love Noah was to let him be safe with someone else. She entered a treatment program and sent Noah a letter every month, which Sarah saved for when he was ready to read them. Noah was wearing his vest. It had a new patch on it now, right over the heart, stitched in gold thread, Phoenix. Grizz was waiting by his Road King. He had made some modifications. He had installed a secure passenger seat with armrests and a high back, right behind the driver. "You ready, Phoenix?" Grizz asked. Noah looked at the bike. He looked at the 67 men waiting for him. He looked at the town that had finally woken up. "Did I earn the wheels?" Noah asked. Grizz knelt down. "Kid," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you earned the whole damn road." Grizz lifted Noah onto the bike. He strapped him in. He handed him a helmet that had been custom painted with blue flames and a phoenix rising on the side. "Fire it up." Bishop, the club president, shouted from the front. 67 engines roared to life. The sound shook the windows of the hospital. It shook the ground. It was the sound of a dragon, but this time, the dragon was a protector. They rode out of Silver Peak in a column that stretched for half a mile. They rode past the abandoned mill, which was now slated for demolition. They rode past the empty lot where Vance's mansion once stood. They rode past the school where the new principal was already rewriting the safety protocols. At the front of the pack, the wind in his face, Noah held on to Grizz's leather jacket. He wasn't cold. For the first time in his life, he wasn't cold. He felt the vibration of the engine, the heat of the sun, and the solid, unbreakable presence of the man in front of him. He closed his eyes and smiled. He didn't need a timer anymore. He had time. He had all the time in the world. And that is how a biker, a boy, and a brotherhood changed a town forever. They say you can't choose your family, but Noah would disagree. Sometimes, family isn't whose blood you carry. It's who spills theirs to keep you safe. The world is full of Vances, but it's full of grizzlies, too. Be a Grizz. Watch the shadows. Listen for the silence. And never, ever look away.